The call came from an unknown number. The Mafia boss almost ignored it, until he heard her voice. "Sir, please don't hang up," the young woman said, breathless, terrified. "I'm a waitress. I think your daughter is unconscious. She's lying on the street." His heart stopped. "Where?" he demanded. "I don't know the address," she cried. "I just finished my shift. She collapsed near the bus stop. She keeps calling your name." The line went silent for half a second. Then the Mafia boss was already moving. Cars swerved as his convoy tore through traffic. Men who feared nothing felt fear for the first time. When he arrived, he saw a sight that broke him. His daughter lay on the cold pavement, pale and unmoving. The waitress knelt beside her, jacket wrapped around the girl, hands shaking as she tried to keep her awake. "I didn't know who else to call," the waitress whispered. "She wouldn't let go of your name." The Mafia boss dropped to his knees, because in that moment, nothing mattered. Not power, not money, not fear. Only whether his daughter would open her eyes again. "Stay with me until the end, because what this poor waitress does next will change the fate of that child and the man who rules the city." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Maria Santos had been on her feet for 14 hours straight. The diner where she worked paid minimum wage, the customers barely tipped, and her shoes had holes that let in every puddle on the cracked sidewalks of downtown. But she couldn't afford new ones. Not when rent was due in 3 days, and her bank account showed $12.37. The October wind cut through her thin uniform as she waited at the bus stop on Maple Street. The last bus of the night would arrive in 10 minutes if she was lucky. If she missed it, the walk home would take 2 hours through neighborhoods where young women disappeared without a trace. That's when she heard the sound, a soft thud, like something heavy hitting concrete. Maria turned and saw her, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, crumpled on the sidewalk 20 feet away. Her blonde hair spilled across the pavement like silk, and she wore a white dress that cost more than Maria made in a month. Maria's first instinct was to look around for help. The street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, no one who might take responsibility for this child, so Maria could catch her bus and pretend she'd never seen anything. Because getting involved in other people's problems was how you ended up in trouble, how you ended up hurt. But the girl wasn't moving. Maria ran to her, dropping her purse as she knelt on the cold concrete. "Hey, sweetie, can you hear me?" The child's skin was pale as porcelain, her lips tinged blue. Maria pressed her ear to the girl's chest and heard the faintest heartbeat, irregular and weak. The child's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. They were the most unusual color Maria had ever seen, almost silver in the streetlight. "Papa," she whispered, so quietly Maria almost missed it. Then her eyes closed again. Maria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She should call 911. That was the logical thing to do. But as her thumb hovered over the numbers, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The girl's wrist bore a small tattoo. Not the kind children got at carnivals, but something permanent, professional. A black rose with thorns that seemed to move in the flickering light. Maria had seen that symbol before, spray-painted on walls in the worst parts of the city. Everyone knew what it meant. This wasn't just any child. This was connected to people you didn't cross, people who made problems disappear permanently. Maria's hands trembled as she checked the girl's pockets for identification, for anything that might tell her what to do. In the small purse attached to the dress, she found a phone. Not a child's toy, but an expensive smartphone with a cracked screen. The phone was locked, but the emergency call feature was active. Maria scrolled through the recent calls and saw only one number that had been dialed repeatedly. The contact name made her stomach drop. "Papa, emergency only." She stared at the number for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Calling this number could be the biggest mistake of her life, or it could save this child who was growing colder by the minute. The girl's breathing was becoming more shallow. Maria made her choice. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered that sent chills down her spine. Deep, controlled, with an accent she couldn't place. The kind of voice that never had to be raised because everyone listened the first time. "Who is this?" he demanded. "How did you get this number?" Maria's voice caught in her throat. "Sir, please don't hang up. I'm a waitress. I think your daughter is unconscious. She's lying on the street." The silence on the other end was deafening. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. "Where?" "I don't know the address," Maria cried, looking around desperately for a street sign. "I just finished my shift. She collapsed near the bus stop. She keeps calling your name." "Maple Street," she added quickly. "Near the old courthouse. Please, she's barely breathing." The line went dead. Maria stared at the phone, wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant. In movies, people who called numbers like this ended up at the bottom of rivers. But the child in her arms was so small, so fragile. Whatever happened to Maria didn't matter now. She shrugged off her jacket and wrapped it around the girl, trying to keep her warm. "Your papa is coming," she whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." The girl's eyes opened again, focusing on Maria with surprising clarity. "Are you an angel?" she asked in a voice like broken glass. "No, sweetie. I'm just someone who couldn't walk away." That's when Maria heard them. Engines roaring through the night, getting closer by the second. Not the single car she'd expected, but what sounded like an entire fleet. The ground beneath her began to vibrate. 3 black vehicles rounded the corner in perfect formation, moving so fast Maria was sure they'd crash. But they stopped with military precision just feet from where she knelt. The doors opened simultaneously, and men emerged who looked like they'd stepped out of a nightmare. They wore expensive suits, but their eyes were cold as winter. Each one carried himself like violence was a second language, like causing pain was as natural as breathing. Maria had never seen men like this outside of movies, and she understood instantly why people crossed the street when they saw them coming. But it was the man who emerged from the center car that made Maria's blood freeze. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a face that belonged on ancient coins. When he looked at her, she felt like a mouse being studied by a hawk. This was the man whose number she'd called. This was Papa. He moved toward them with purpose, and Maria realized she was about to learn whether her decision to make that call would save this child's life or end her own. The man who approached them moved like death itself, each step deliberate, calculated, as if the very pavement bent to his will. His eyes never left his daughter's face, but Maria could feel his awareness of everything around him, the weight of his attention, the danger that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Behind him, his men formed a protective circle, hands inside their jackets, eyes scanning every shadow, every window, every possible threat. These weren't bodyguards. They were predators in suits, the kind of men who solved problems permanently and never lost sleep over it. But when the Mafia boss reached his daughter, something extraordinary happened. This man who commanded fear across the entire city, who could end lives with a phone call, dropped to his knees like any terrified father. His hands shook as he touched the child's face. "Isabella," he whispered, and his voice cracked on her name. "Papa's here, little star. Papa's here." Maria watched in stunned silence as tears rolled down the face of the most dangerous man she'd ever seen. This was Vincent Torino, she realized with growing horror. She'd heard the name whispered in the diner, seen it in newspaper headlines that made people go pale. The man who owned half the city, who settled disputes with bullets instead of lawyers, and she'd called his emergency line like she was reporting a lost cat. What happened to her? Vincent's voice was steady now, but Maria heard the barely contained fury beneath the surface. When men like him got angry, buildings burned and people vanished. "I don't know," Maria stammered. "I was waiting for the bus and heard her fall. She was already unconscious when I found her. She kept saying your name, so I used her phone to call you." Vincent lifted his daughter with infinite care, cradling her against his chest like she was made of glass. "Get Dr. Morrison!" he commanded, without looking away from Isabella. Tell him to prep the private suite. Full trauma team. One of his men was already on the phone, speaking in rapid, clipped tones. Another was examining the spot where Isabella had fallen, looking for clues, for answers, for someone to blame. You, Vincent said suddenly, those steel-gray eyes fixing on Maria. What's your name? Maria's mouth went dry. In movies, this was the moment when witnesses disappeared forever. When Good Samaritans learned that no good deed goes unpunished in the world of organized crime. Maria Santos, she whispered. Maria Santos, he repeated, as if memorizing it. You could have walked away. You could have pretended you never saw her. Why didn't you? The question hung in the air like a blade. Maria understood that her answer might determine whether she saw another sunrise. These men didn't believe in coincidences or random acts of kindness. In their world, everything was calculated. Every move had an angle. Because she's just a little girl, Maria said simply, and she needed help. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, surprise maybe, or recognition of something he'd forgotten existed in the world. How old are you, Maria Santos? 23. You work at the diner on 5th Street? Maria nodded, wondering how he already knew that. But of course he did. Men like Vincent Torino knew everything about everyone who mattered, and apparently, saving his daughter made her matter. You make $8 an hour plus tips that don't exist because the customers are broke and bitter, he continued. You live in a studio apartment with a broken heater and walk home alone through neighborhoods where young women disappear. You eat cereal for dinner because it's all you can afford, and you haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. Each fact hit Maria like a physical blow. He'd learned her entire life story in the minutes since she'd made that phone call. That meant he had people watching her, investigating her, deciding whether she was a threat or an opportunity. Your mother died when you were 16, Vincent continued, his voice softer now. Cancer. Your father left before you could walk. No siblings, no boyfriend, no family to miss you if you vanished tonight. Maria's blood turned to ice water. This was it. This was how her story ended. She'd tried to save a child, and instead sealed her own fate. She thought about running, but Vincent's men had positioned themselves to cut off every escape route. Please, she whispered. I just wanted to help her. Vincent studied her for a long moment, his daughter still unconscious in his arms. When he spoke again, his words were the last thing Maria expected to hear. Get in the car. What? You're coming with us to the hospital. Isabella might need you when she wakes up. Children remember faces, voices. Yours might be the first thing she recalls from tonight. Maria stared at him in confusion. I don't understand. My daughter is everything to me, Maria Santos. The only pure thing left in my world. Tonight, you became part of her story. That makes you part of mine. One of Vincent's men opened the rear door of the center vehicle. The interior was luxury beyond anything Maria had ever seen. All black leather and polished wood. Vincent slid inside with Isabella, then looked at Maria expectantly. I'm not asking, he said quietly. Maria climbed into the car on trembling legs. The door closed with a solid thunk that sounded like a vault ceiling. As they pulled away from the curb, she caught a glimpse of her purse still lying on the sidewalk where she'd dropped it. Her old life left behind on the pavement. The drive to the hospital was silent except for Vincent's murmured words to his daughter. Promises that everything would be okay, that Papa would fix whatever was wrong, that she was safe now. The tenderness in his voice was jarring, coming from a man whose orders had ended so many lives. Maria pressed herself against the far door, trying to make sense of what was happening. An hour ago, she'd been a nobody waitress worried about making rent. Now she was sitting in a luxury car with the most feared crime boss in the city, racing through the night toward an unknown future. She has seizures, Vincent said suddenly, not looking away from Isabella. The doctors call it a rare neurological condition. Stress can trigger them. Someone or something frightened her badly tonight. He turned those piercing eyes on Maria. Did you see anyone else? Anyone who might have been following her? Maria shook her head. The street was empty when I found her. But I wasn't really paying attention before that. I was just trying to catch my bus. Vincent nodded slowly. We'll find out what happened. And when we do, whoever is responsible will learn what it means to hurt my family. The hospital appeared ahead of them, a massive complex of glass and steel. But instead of pulling up to the emergency room entrance like Maria expected, they drove around to a private entrance where medical staff waited with a gurney and equipment she didn't recognize. Dr. Morrison was a thin man with kind eyes and steady hands who clearly knew exactly who his patient was. He examined Isabella with professional efficiency, while Vincent hovered nearby like a caged predator. Preliminary assessment suggests a stress-induced episode, the doctor reported. Her vitals are stabilizing, but I want to run a full neurological workup to be certain. Vincent nodded curtly. Whatever she needs. Cost is irrelevant. As they wheeled Isabella away to a private suite that looked more like a luxury hotel room than a hospital room, Vincent turned his attention back to Maria. She'd been standing in the corner, trying to be invisible, but there was no hiding from those calculating eyes. You saved my daughter's life tonight, he said simply. That creates a debt between us. You don't owe me anything, Maria said quickly. Anyone would have done the same thing. Vincent's smile was cold as winter. No, Maria Santos. They wouldn't have. Trust me on that. He gestured to one of his men, who produced a thick envelope from his jacket. Your rent is covered for the next year. Your student loans are paid off. There's enough left over for you to quit that diner and find something better. Maria stared at the envelope like it might explode. I can't take your money. You can, and you will. Vincent's tone brooked no argument, because refusing would be an insult to my daughter, and insulting my family is something people only do once. The threat was delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took Maria a moment to process what he'd said. This wasn't charity. This was business. A transaction in a world where debts were always collected, where favors came with interest that never stopped compounding. There's more, Vincent continued, settling into a chair beside Isabella's bed. You're going to quit your job tomorrow. You'll receive a new position at my restaurant downtown. Better pay, better hours, better everything. You'll also move into one of my apartment buildings. Security, parking, amenities you've never dreamed of. Maria's head spun. Why are you doing this? Because my daughter is going to need someone she trusts when she wakes up. Someone who doesn't smell like fear and violence. Someone who represents safety instead of danger. Vincent's eyes never left Isabella's face. You were the first person to help her without wanting something in return. Do you understand how rare that is in my world? Before Maria could respond, Isabella stirred. Her silver eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Papa? She whispered. Vincent was beside her instantly, taking her small hand in his massive one. I'm here, little star. Papa's here. Isabella's gaze wandered until it found Maria standing in the corner. A smile crossed her pale features. The angel. You stayed. Of course I stayed, Maria said softly, moving closer to the bed. I promised I would. Isabella tried to sit up, but Vincent gently pressed her back down. Rest, sweetheart. Tell Papa what happened tonight. The child's expression darkened. The bad man was following me, from school to the car, then from the car when Marco was getting ice cream. He had pictures of you, Papa, pictures of our house. Vincent's jaw tightened, and Maria saw his free hand curl into a fist. What did this man look like? Tall like you, but skinny. He had a scar here. Isabella touched her cheek, and he smelled like cigarettes and something bad, something that made my head hurt. Vincent exchanged glances with one of his men, who immediately stepped into the hallway to make phone calls. Maria didn't need to understand the coded language to know that someone was about to have a very bad day. Did he touch you? Vincent asked, his voice deadly quiet. Isabella shook her head. He tried to grab me when I got scared and started running. But then the seizure came, and everything went dark. When I woke up, the angel was there. Vincent looked at Maria with something that might have been gratitude if men like him were capable of such emotions. You scared him off by showing up, probably saved her from being taken. The weight of what could have happened settled on Maria's shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd stumbled into something bigger than a sick child on the street. She'd interrupted a kidnapping attempt on the daughter of the most dangerous man in the city. Who would do this? Maria asked without thinking. Vincent's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Someone who doesn't understand the rules of my world. Someone who thinks they can touch what belongs to me and walk away breathing. Dr. Morrison returned with test results, confirming that Isabella was stable but needed rest. As the medical team prepared discharge paperwork, Vincent pulled Maria aside. What I told you about the job, the apartment, the money, that stands. But now there's another element to consider. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Someone targeted my daughter tonight. That means they're watching my family, learning our routines, looking for weaknesses. Isabella trusts you, which makes you valuable, but it also makes you a target. Maria felt the room spinning. A target? Enemies use leverage. They hurt what you love to control you. If they think you matter to me, they'll try to use you against me. Vincent studied her face. I'm offering you protection, but it comes with a price. You'll never be just Maria Santos, the waitress, again. You'll be part of my world, with all the benefits and dangers that entails. The choice stretched before her like a chasm. On one side lay her old life, poverty, loneliness, invisibility, but safety in being nobody. On the other side was the unknown, luxury, purpose, meaning, but constant danger from forces she couldn't understand. What if I say no? She asked. Vincent's expression didn't change. Then you disappear. New identity, new city, new life. You'll be comfortable, but you'll never see Isabella again. And you'll always wonder if the next person who recognizes you is someone who wants to hurt the man who helped you. It wasn't really a choice at all. Vincent was offering her two versions of the same thing. A complete break from everything she'd ever known. The only difference was which direction the break would take her. Isabella's voice cut through the tension. Angel, are you coming home with us? Maria looked at the child, so small and fragile in the hospital bed, yet somehow the center of a storm that reached every corner of the city. This little girl had lost her mother to cancer, just like Maria had. She lived in a world of bodyguards and bulletproof cars, where showing kindness to strangers was so rare it created debts that lasted lifetimes. Yes, Maria heard herself say. I'm coming home with you. Vincent nodded once, as if he'd expected no other answer. Then we leave in 1 hour. Time enough for you to say goodbye to your old life. But as Maria sat in the back of another luxury car an hour later, watching her former neighborhood disappear in the rearview mirror, she realized there was nothing to say goodbye to. No friends to call, no family to notify, no possessions worth collecting. Her entire existence could be erased without leaving a trace. The car pulled through gates that rose from the ground, like something out of a science fiction movie. The mansion beyond them was a fortress disguised as a home. All clean lines and bulletproof glass, surrounded by gardens that hid motion sensors and armed guards. Welcome to your new life, Maria Santos, Vincent said, as they stepped onto marble floors that reflected the chandeliers above. Try not to get killed. Isabella giggled at her father's dark humor, but Maria saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't salvation. This was conscription into a war she didn't understand, fighting enemies she couldn't see, protecting a child who'd already seen more violence than any 7-year-old should know existed. The house staff appeared like ghosts, a housekeeper who spoke in whispers, a cook who watched everything but said nothing, security personnel who nodded respectfully but kept their hands near concealed weapons. Everyone moved with the careful precision of people who knew that mistakes in this house could be fatal. Your room is next to Isabella's, Vincent explained as they climbed a staircase wide enough to drive a car up, connected by a door that only opens from her side. If anything happens in the night, anything at all, you get her to the panic room and press the red button. Don't think, don't hesitate, just run. Maria nodded, trying to process instructions for scenarios she hoped would never happen. But the weight of responsibility was already settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just a companion now. She was a guardian, a last line of defense between innocence and the darkness that surrounded this family. Isabella's room was a child's paradise. Toys worth more than Maria's former annual salary, books in 3 languages, a computer system that looked like mission control. But the windows were bulletproof, the door reinforced with steel, and a panic button was mounted beside the light switch. "Papa worries too much," Isabella said, noticing Maria's expression. "But sometimes bad things happen, like tonight. That's why I need an angel to watch over me." As Vincent tucked his daughter into bed and kissed her forehead, Maria saw the man behind the monster. A father terrified of losing the only thing that mattered to him, trying to build walls high enough to keep the world's darkness away from his child's light. "Thank you," he said quietly to Maria as they left Isabella's room. "For tonight. For staying. For choosing this. I know it's not easy." Maria looked back at the closed door, behind which a little girl who called her an angel was already falling asleep. "She saved my life too, you know. I just didn't know I needed saving until tonight." Vincent's smile was different this time. Warmer, more human. "Get some rest, Maria Santos. Tomorrow your real education begins." Maria's first morning in the Torino mansion began with silence so complete it felt unnatural. No traffic sounds, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no distant sirens that had been the soundtrack of her old life. Just silence thick as velvet, broken only by the soft whisper of expensive air conditioning and the distant hum of security systems that never slept. She woke in a bed larger than her entire former apartment, surrounded by furniture that belonged in magazines she'd never been able to afford. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back like cold water. She was living with a crime boss. She was responsible for his daughter. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Maria?" The voice was gentle, professional. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Mr. Torino is waiting in the garden with Isabella." Maria dressed quickly in clothes that had appeared in her closet overnight. Everything fit perfectly, from the designer jeans to the cashmere sweater that felt like wearing a cloud. Someone had studied her measurements, her style, her entire existence while she slept. The garden was a masterpiece of controlled nature. Flowers bloomed in perfect rows. Fountains bubbled with mathematical precision. And every tree seemed positioned to provide exactly the right amount of shade. It was beautiful and sterile, like everything else in Vincent's world. Isabella sat at a wrought iron table that probably cost more than Maria's yearly salary, carefully arranging berries on her plate by color. She wore a yellow dress that made her look like captured sunlight, but her movements were precise, calculated. Even at 7 years old, she understood that chaos was dangerous. "Angel!" Isabella's face lit up when she saw Maria. "Papa was just telling me about your new job. You're going to help manage his restaurant. Isn't that wonderful?" Vincent rose from his chair with fluid grace. In daylight, he looked different. Still dangerous, still commanding, but somehow more human. The expensive suit had been replaced with dark slacks and a white shirt that emphasized the silver at his temples. "Good morning, Maria. I trust you slept well?" His tone was polite, but those steel-gray eyes missed nothing. He was cataloging her reactions, her comfort level, her potential for flight. "Yes, thank you." Maria settled into the chair beside Isabella, acutely aware of the armed men positioned discreetly around the garden's perimeter. "Everything is beautiful. Papa designed it himself," Isabella said proudly. "He says beauty is important because there's so much ugliness in the world. We have to create our own light." Vincent's expression softened as he watched his daughter. "Isabella has an art lesson this morning with her tutor. Would you like to observe? Tomorrow you'll start accompanying her to all her activities." The weight of responsibility settled heavier on Maria's shoulders. She wasn't just living in this house. She was being woven into every aspect of Isabella's carefully protected existence. "I'd love to," Maria said, meaning it. Isabella beamed and reached for her hand. The art studio occupied an entire wing of the mansion. Natural light streamed through bulletproof skylights, illuminating canvases and easels arranged with museum-quality precision. Isabella's tutor was a woman in her 50s, with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes that held secrets. "This is Miss Catherine," Isabella announced. "She taught my mama how to paint before I was born. Now she teaches me." Catherine inclined her head respectfully to Maria. "Mr. Torino mentioned you'd be joining us. Isabella, shall we continue your portrait series?" Maria watched in fascination as Isabella transformed. Gone was the careful, controlled child from breakfast. Here, with a paintbrush in her hand, she became something wild and free. Her strokes were bold, confident, creating swirls of color that seemed to dance on the canvas. "Tell me about this piece," Maria said, studying a painting of what looked like angels with dark wings. "Those are the guardian angels," Isabella explained without looking up from her work. "Mama used to say that everyone has angels watching over them, but sometimes the angels have to do bad things to protect the people they love, so their wings turn dark, but they're still angels." Maria glanced at Catherine, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Even in art, Isabella was processing the reality of her father's world. She understood that protection sometimes required violence, that love could wear a dangerous face. The morning passed quickly. Isabella painted while Maria learned the rhythms of this strange household. Servants appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Phone calls came and went in languages she didn't recognize. Vincent moved through it all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of controlled chaos. At lunch, he joined them again, this time with papers that required his signature. Each document seemed to represent someone's fate being decided with the stroke of a pen. As Maria watched Vincent sign those papers with the same hand that had gently stroked his daughter's hair, she finally understood the truth. Sometimes angels do have dark wings. Sometimes protection requires crossing lines that can never be uncrossed. And sometimes, a single phone call on a cold October night changes everything. That poor waitress, who couldn't afford new shoes, had become something she never expected. Not just a guardian or a companion, but a bridge between two worlds that should never have touched. She'd learned that even the most dangerous men in the city could drop to their knees when their children were in danger. That love and violence could exist in the same heart, in the same moment, in the same choice to pick up a phone and dial a number that would change 3 lives forever. Vincent Torino had found something he thought was lost to his world. Isabella had found her angel, and Maria Santos had discovered that sometimes salvation comes disguised as the very thing that terrifies you most.